Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today and being here with us for our Talent Alliance Spotlight on Neurodiversity. My name is Ashley Morris, and I lead the Salesforce Talent Alliance, which is focused on growing and diversifying our ecosystem alongside all of you, our partners and our customers. And our work really centers around three pillars. The first is inspiring people to pursue careers in the Salesforce ecosystem. The second is working with all of our employers, our Salesforce partners, and our customers to get them to work with us to build up the next generation of trailblazers with a particular focus on how we build an ecosystem that represents the communities in which we live and work. And the final focus of our work is on making sure that we're able to connect all of our employers, our customers, and our partners to the great talent that is being trained, in many cases from our amazing workforce development organizations. And before we dive into the subject of today's presentation, I want to take just a moment double-clicking into the second pillar here, our employer commitment, for those of you who may not have already joined the Salesforce Talent Alliance. To become a member of the Talent Alliance, we ask employers to commit to three things. The first is a set of inclusive hiring principles. And this is things like removing bias in job descriptions. And we provide you with the resources to be able to take action on these things. The second commitment is that at least 20% of the hiring that you do within your Salesforce practice or department will be for those who are new to Salesforce. That can be people who are reskilled from a different career, recent grads, or anyone who has less than 6 months of paid Salesforce experience. And the final commitment is to offering interviews to certified graduates from select workforce development programs. And in return, we support our employers through certification vouchers, points on the Trailblazer scorecard for our partners, and many other opportunities. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our topic of today, neurodiversity in the workplace, and introduce you to our esteemed speakers. First up, I'd like to say hello to Ed Thompson, who is the CEO and the founder of Optimize, which is the leading provider of enterprise neurodiversity training solutions. Optimize works globally with organizations like Google, Intel, Deloitte, IBM, and of course, Salesforce, enabling robust and impactful neurodiversity at work programs. Ed has also become a frequent speaker on the topic of neurodiversity in the workplace. Welcome, Ed. Next up, we have Elise, who is a clinical psychologist with a career dedicated to human development, both typical and atypical, with a focus on diversity. Elise has extensive professional experience focused on developmental disturbances and autism spectrum disorder in the areas of diagnostic appraisal, individual psychotherapy, and guidance to parents and professionals from clinical and educational fields. She's a specialist and a qualified consultant in the International Classification of Functioning, Disability, and Health. Welcome, Elise. Next up, we have Eduardo, an HR executive with more than 15 years of experience in multinational, national companies and startups across health, financial, marketing, telecom, civil construction, food, and technology segments. He has experience in transformation projects and organizational design, strategic HR management, digital transformation, and the future of work. He's very active in the human resources community, in the startup ecosystem, and with a number of different social causes. Eduardo graduated in computer science and business administration with a specialization in psychology and is currently the chief people officer at EveryMind, a Salesforce partner. And last, but certainly not least, we have Jessica, who has spent the last 10 years in recruiting programs for underrepresented groups. Now, in her role of Disabilities at Work program manager, she works on recruiting and running programs to make sure that Salesforce is one of the best places to work for people with disabilities globally. Welcome, Jessica, and thank you so much to all of our panelists here today. So in order to get us started, I'd like for everyone to share a little bit about how you got involved and passionate in this space around neurodiversity and what your work looks like, both personally and professionally, in the advocacy of individuals with neurodiverse backgrounds. So why don't we start for this first question in the order of you all on the screen. And so Ed, I'll turn it over to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. So I was hired, actually, my journey starts, I was hired onto the leadership team of a tech company in London with a sort of general strategy role, not really expecting at the time to do anything around people, but the longer I got into the job, I realized actually people were key. By far the most important issues we faced as a company were around people. Specifically, we couldn't hire tech talent fast enough. And we looked around the company and we realized everybody rather looked the same and probably thought the same as a result. So I got involved in strategic, diverse hiring, very much rooted in those business priorities. And that got bigger and bigger, and ended up building a tech apprenticeships program for the whole of the London tech sector. That was when I had a link into this world, a family connection. My aunt by marriage is a lifelong neurodiversity advocate and one of the first autistic board members at Autism Speaks, and she encouraged me to sort of bring some of that approach and whatever I'd been doing in London into this field, 5 or 6 years ago. And as I explored the very nascent at the time neurodiversity at work space, and were connected to some of the earliest employers involved in this field, I realized it was sort of very similar to some of the stuff I'd done before. I mean, here's this enormous talent pool that's been so poorly hired and so poorly included. I think what was different from some of the work we'd done in London, which was more around people from disadvantaged backgrounds, was the level of ignorance amongst employers that was manifest on this topic specifically, that actually, probably unusually for diversity topics, this was an area that people just simply didn't know about and didn't have their head around, and what they thought they knew was wrong. So that was really the genesis of Optimize, to fill that gap. And we sort of put ourselves in a unique position, working with employers, working with researchers and universities, thought leaders, and the community, running focus groups with the Neurodistinct community around the world, and packaging that into digestible trainings that help drive what we call neuro inclusion in organizations. And that's what we've been doing ever since.
That's great. It's such a cool story and roadmap of how you found yourself to where you are. Great. Elise, would love to hear from you.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to share this panel with so many qualified and great professional and human beings that are making the difference in the world. So thank you again. So as you said in the presentation, I started off in my early years in the undergrad program, dedicating my studies, researches, internships, and everything to developmental disturbances. I especially got involved with autism in the early years of my graduation. And in my private practice, I happened to come across so many different people with autism in the childhood and adulthood, and little was said about the adulthood portion of this population. So I started dedicating more studies, more researches on that. And a couple years ago, a couple friends of mine and I created ATIP, which is a startup, a tool that is meant to connect neurodiverse people to companies and enterprises that are literally interested in diversifying their diverse workforce. So, and ATIP is also involved in organizing a event that is called Autism Tech down here in Brazil, which is a kind of a boot camp for training people with neurodiverse and hiring them or setting them in the workforce of our partners in the event, the enterprises that are partners in the event. So that's a great co-realization. FIAP is also involved in the organization, and Inclusão Humanizada, which is another startup that was created, was from the second edition of Autism Tech, and is mostly partnered with people with autism. So we're highly interested, highly committed to helping neurodiverse people be seen and validated as great talents to the workforce. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elise. Eduardo, over to you to learn a little bit about how you got involved in neurodistinct and neurodiverse individuals.
Okay. Hello. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this event. It's a relevant and important thing. It's a great question. I'm passionate about the transformation and development of people, effective that recently had access to in Brazil is that only 15% of neurodiverse people are in the job market. Last year, I had the opportunity to participate in a hackathon focus to gather a tip on the neurodiverse community that allowed me to learn more about this topic. The technology market around the world is a major employer for the neurodiverse community. As the person is charge of people at every mind, it's me. I have to work about how to get that people in the job market and create opportunity. I have a big difficulty, and for me, it's necessary transformation in the job market.
Yeah, lots of opportunity for sure. It's an interesting statistic you shared about 15%. Jessica, over to you to round us out.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ashley. So I started my career working one-on-one with adults with disabilities in more like supported employment type opportunities, helping them secure competitive employment in other workplaces, not Salesforce. And I just really fell in love with the opportunity to work one-on-one with people who are neurodiverse, and also the great impact that they were having with employees and the employers of where they're being placed. So from there, I fell into recruiting kind of by a fluke, just because I was having a difficult time finding the same type of job when I moved to the Bay Area. And I came across Salesforce and got into recruiting, and was very lucky enough to work more in an equality type recruiting for many years here at Salesforce. And then just in December, when the Office of Accessibility opens up a role that would work as the Disabilities at Work program manager, so helping Salesforce be the best place to work for people with disabilities, I absolutely jumped on the opportunity to be able to really bridge my passion and my background with my professional recruiting experience. So I'm in this role to make Salesforce the best place to work for people with disabilities, and I'm so happy to be sharing this information and knowledge with everyone on the call.
Awesome. And we're lucky to have you at Salesforce, Jessica. So lots of different folks touched on this in their introductions, but I really want to drill into, for all of our employers on the line who may not be very familiar with this population, what are the main advantages that individuals who are neurodiverse or are neurodistinct can bring to an organization? And Ed, why don't we start off with your perspective here?
Yeah, I first of all, I think it's important just to emphasize the fact that, you know, every team is neurodiverse by definition, in that there's 5 or 6 of us on this call. There's no one sort of normal brain. You know, everybody thinks differently, processes information differently, communicates and presents differently, you know, and so on. And within that, you know, many people, potentially up to 20%, are within, you know, neuro minorities that, as we've discussed, have been typically misunderstood to some extent and overlooked. But any organization, you know, particularly of any size, not only is fundamentally neurodiverse anyway, but is going to have some of those thinkers in it. Now, whether those thinkers are, you know, feel empowered to share their stories, their concerns, and so on, it is often, you know, dependent on whether they feel comfortable, you know, doing that. I think Salesforce is a leader in this field because it's the kind of place where people can do that, and we hope that they will. But I think it's really important to calibrate that when we're talking about neurodiversity, we're talking about neurodistinct talent. We're not just, as it were, talking about people who don't have. You almost certainly do have people, whether or not they are, feeling comfortable. Anyway, that aside, I would just say there's sort of two layers we can think about here. First of all, the individual attributes of people who are neurodistinct are clear. I mean, you look at the top entrepreneurs in the world, Richard Branson, half of the sharks on Shark Tank, and several of the dragons on Dragon's Den for those of us in the UK with a different version. The founder of IKEA. I mean, people in the community, look at most leading business people of our time and see either somebody with an open diagnosis and disclosure, or somebody who is likely neurodistinct, even if they don't necessarily have the evidence. And those are people who demonstrate many of the attributes associated with thinking differently, creativity, sometimes bottom-up data-driven thinking, sometimes sort of pattern recognition, a big picture thinking, attention to detail, focus over long periods. These are not attributes that everybody has in the same degree, but we do, when we talk about neurodistinct talent, we often talk about spiky profiles. So the idea that people, rather than being sort of 7 out of 10 for everything, can be 10 out of 10 for some of the core things with their role, but find some of the other things more challenging. Well, we can sort of focus on what can they not do? Why don't we focus on what can they do? And if we can get someone who's 10 out of 10 in something to really maximize their strengths, what is the impact of that? But I would say beyond individual attributes, we have to think about the collective. And so the idea of diversity of thought is not new. The idea that if we get different perspectives, different thinkers in a room, then good things happen, and we raise the possibility of innovative outcomes. And so to me, it's not just about hiring people because they bring individual talents. It's about what are we trying to do as an organization here? You read any annual report in corporate America, you'll see a CEO who talks about innovation, creativity, how do we stay ahead? Well, what are we doing to foster that? And I think fundamental to that should be, getting all of the different thinkers we have as a human species in a room together and making the best of them.
That's a great perspective, Ed. Lots to think about there and unpack. I love that. Elise, I want to dovetail off of Ed's response in a slightly different angle. What would you say are the biggest misconceptions in your experience about the neurodiverse community?
All right. So greatly said, Ed. Thank you so much. First, I wanted to touch on what they have to bring in the organization. So if we're specifically looking into the autism spectrum, the neurodiverse part of autism, we do have individuals that tend to have a better capacity to concentrate their attention in difficult tasks, to maintain that attention or that same capacity or the same performance in doing repetitive tasks. And they have great advanced visual perception, so they can pick on details, and especially for programming and coding, that is very in need. So also remembering rules, patterns, concrete concepts are great with long-lasting memories, especially with images and statistics. Great mathematical skills, technological skills, music or artistic skills, and they tend to be very honest and objective. And also seems to be a very reliable a population, a very reliable professional to work with, because they will only miss a day of work if it's what we literally call emergency. Otherwise, they're very reliable on that, and very sincere on their perceptions, objective in their communication, we'll have different ways to think and understand the situations and the world, as Ed was saying. We'll be consistent in their deliveries and participation, and definitely do the best for their companies. So when we think about the misconceptions that people usually have, it's mostly related to what media does for us, which is greatly welcome, because we do have to address more and more stuff about neurodiverse, autism, and etc. But they have to do a little side cut and dedicate attention to a piece of that information. And because we're talking about a great umbrella and a great spectrum, then evidently it's hard to cover all the aspects of it. So little pieces of information can be generalized or unspecified, and that can create the misconceptions. So what I see that the misconceptions are most related on are people thinking that neurodiverse people have their own world. They don't participate or integrate in the real world. They live so differently, and putting autism or the neurodiverse health conditions in the mental health impairing condition that won't allow them to really participate and contribute as they can. So the misconceptions are based on some sort of stigma and generalization on something that is very diverse, as we're talking about neurodiverse. And on top of that, people also think that they might be cool or rude or not polite or anything like that. But what it is that because they perceive the information differently, they process the information differently, they will deliver it differently, and it's mainly more objective and less concerned about abstract concepts, more in the concrete side. So none of that is a bad thing to have in a workforce, because if we do know how to take that not as a bad comment or anything, but take that as a positive criticism that we need to think of, or that we can have the opportunity to see things in a different way, like Ed was saying. So it's very welcome to change the world. So that's what I had to say about the misconceptions. Thank you.
Great. I love that. And lots of good things to think about. And I want to make sure that we spend the remainder of the time that we have today talking about action. So I've got 2 questions, and I'm going to ask everyone to give their rapid fire answer. The first is why organizations should prioritize this population, which many of you have touched on already. So anything you have to add there. And then the second piece that I really want to dig into is how. How, if I've never thought about this, what are the first steps that I should take? What are the things that I should be thinking about, both in terms of how to attract and recruit a neurodiverse workforce, but then also how to create a welcoming environment? So a lot of stuff packed into that question. I'll ask everyone for their top thoughts they have. And Jessica, I'd love to start with you and for you to share a little bit about how you're thinking about this for Salesforce, for our own internal employees, and then we'll get everybody else's take on it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, all really great answers as to why this should be a priority. And, I just want to double down on like the diversity of thought is huge, right? Like we're all competing for talent, right? And why not just untap this diversity of thought talent pool that's out there? So what Salesforce is doing, and where I feel like is the best place to get started, is it's kind of and I feel like it's best done in parallel, is we have partnered with Ed Thompson on the call today and Optimize on a very robust training for all employees globally at Salesforce on how to best work with people who are neurodiverse and how to just best set up people for success. And then in parallel, run an Autism at Work program, work with your business leaders and your hiring teams to understand the needs of the organization and really prioritize those things. And I feel like the sooner you get started, the sooner you'll be recruiting the best talent.
Excellent. Ed, over to you.
Yeah, I think that's. I was sort of going to say some of the same thing. I suppose just at a high level, people are the most important and expensive asset of any organisation, right? And in the 21st century, it's pretty clear with the pace of technological change, the plummeting lifespan of any company, from about 50, 60 years, about half a century ago now, down to about 15. Getting the absolute most out of your people is key. You need the best people empowered to be the best individual and collective version of themselves. I think any organization that doesn't prioritize that is going to fall behind, and that's why you see people issues becoming CEO priorities, and even people like me, as I've told my story, getting more involved in this field. For the how, and I'll just let me just put one thing out there and sort of leave it dangling. I think the most important thing is to start the conversation, start talking about it internally. We call it flying the flag. If you're an HR person or whatever, most of your people will have never heard you say that you care about this. And by starting to say that, and crucially inviting people to participate, I think you'll be amazed and pleasantly surprised by how much enthusiasm and even urgency people feel towards this topic, and how quickly great things can happen as you start to build that momentum.
Excellent. Eduardo, love your perspective here.
Okay. Why the company needs to prioritize everyone, really everyone, give equal opportunity, condition for everyone to work and to choose what they want to do. Really enable people to use their potential. And how, in my perspective, the first is to give you opportunity. In the next, begin to develop human resource, and the leads should have a look of university, and the topic is as a journey. It's important. It's investment time in follow-up. And finish. Every artist believes in diversity, and its principle is to contribution to development of society.
Excellent. All right, Elise, round us out. Final thoughts in this space.
Excellent. So I think that's a great way to close this conversation, because I do honestly believe that the world can change with enterprises hiring or valuing more the neurodiverse talents. So I believe that all the great evolutions that our societies and we had as a society were developed, act, or thought by a neurodiverse person. So we do have to recognize at this point that we're a little too late in valuing people that do think outside of the box, and it's more than time for us to give them the protagonism that they deserve and need to really change the way we perceive the world, the way we live the world. So little things that I can comment on in how to attract and retain the neurodiverse people in the enterprises are, firstly, knowing them as they are, like really investing the time in understanding how their neurofunctioning goes, how they like to work better, what are the kinds of accommodations that can be placed to enhance their capacity to give the best performance. So provide proper training for the ones that are gonna get into a position, and the ones that are into that position to develop their careers is a great tip. always align expectations and go step-by-step goals to make it clear, ensure that it's known what is expected for them to do, and avoid sudden changes or routines with a lot of unforeseen events. Create friendly environment and allow usage of excessive or adaptive devices to compensate or provide, again, better performance, and facilitate interprofessional communication to ensure full comprehension of the tasks, and making sure that communication is objective, without any possibilities to miscomprehension and misconceptions. So those are the tips that I think that are great for enterprises to put in action when they're hiring and considering having neurodiverse people in their teams.
Excellent.
That's what ATIP does, and what Autism Tech is trying to do also with enhancing the neurodiverse's capacity and knowledges to put them in high skilled positions in the workforce.
Great. And that is actually a perfect transition to some resources that we want to share with everybody on the line today. Such rich conversation, Ed, Elise, Eduardo, Jessica. I wish we had 2 hours to dive into this. There is just so much to talk about, but I know that you have certainly gotten me thinking a lot. I love the point about how we celebrate the neurodiversity that already exists within our organizations as a first step. I think it's some really, really thought-provoking conversation. So I want to thank all of you all for being here today. And if we can go to the resources so that everybody can take a look at those, we've got them up on the slide, and we'll pop them into the chat as well. So you can see the ebook from Ed's organization, Optimize, which is an incredible resource to get started. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and that will really help you learn a little bit more about this topic and actions that you can take. And then all of our other panelists and their organizations are represented here as well. So please take a look at these different resources. Thank you again to our panelists, and thanks to everyone on the line who dedicated 30 minutes or a little more of their day today to spending with us to talk about this very important topic in light of Autism Awareness Month this month. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.